Thank you, everybody, for signing up and participating. We are lined up here to talk to some international experts on project controls, and in particular, how they use earned value in their different respective locations. But first, the overall theme here is, the EVM, it's fundamentally a program management tool. And at the end of the day, whether you do compliance or whether you don't do compliance, the data that comes out of that system is important to help program managers manage their programs. It allows a disciplined planning and tracking progress, but you guys are all aware of that. And in the US, there's mandates for certain contract types and contract values, where we mandate the use of compliant EVMS to EIA standard. And with that, then there's compliance reviews, again, to ensure that the system is actually operating and integrating all the data necessary in order to get the reports and the information to the program managers. And there's various contract values for different levels of support and reporting, that kind of thing. And the benefit is early insight to program issues, that kind of thing. Again, so EVM is a program management tool that, combined with TPMs and a variety of other management kinds of tools, are used to help manage programs and support program management decisions in real time. Well, we have compiled a list of international experts who use earned value, or are either going to be using, are starting to use, have used it for a long time, and they're doing it by choice, because of the value of program management as an earned value as a program management tool. So want to hear from those guys so that we can learn a little bit about what they think are goods and bads about earned value, how they implement it, on what types of programs they implement it on. So I'm really looking forward to this session. Please, if you have questions, put them in the chat session. I'll be moderator, and what I'll do is I'll try to interrupt as appropriate or not, and get questions to them. There will be time at the end of the session as well, at the end of the presentations by the presenters. We will also have the ability to ask some questions at that point in time. So again, we're advocating this to be a discussion-oriented session. So any questions before we begin? All right, so we're off. All right, so the first one is Mauricio Guava Silva, project manager from FGV from Brazil. He's an electronic engineer with MSc on technology. He's a postgraduate in network management, senior business consultant at FGV, working as a leader in project management office for FGV technical consultancy unit. He's a program management professional, as well as have a couple of other certifications. 25 plus years on project management involving different areas of defense, Brazilian Navy primarily, transportation, Rio de Janeiro Line 4 Metro, some infrastructure, real estate, information technology. So, he's been program managing a whole wide range of projects, and he's looking to use earned value in Brazil. So, Mauricio, I'll turn it over to you, and you can have the stage for the next 20 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks, Gordon, for the presentation. Thanks, Guy, that are my partners here in this meeting, Steve, Alexandre, and Ken. And I suppose I am the more inexperienced guy on VMS on this table, on this panel, but I will try to expose our experience here in Brazil with EVMS. That's something that we believe that is really some kind of very interesting tool to support the monitoring and control of our projects here. We have an agenda and trying to expose our experience with a specific project for Brazilian Navy that we conducted for an acquisition for 4 frigates in 2017. It was a project that lasts from 2017 up to 2019 when we signed the contract. And we try to show to people here in this webinar why we choose for EVMS on a kind of tool to monitor and control this contract. So just a quick Brazilian perspective involving project management. We started to here in Brazil to work with project management in the 70s, considering that at the end of the 60s, the Project Management Institute started its activities in the US. And the Project Management Institute's chapter in Brazil, the first one, it started its service on 1998, 30 years after. But from the end of the 70s, we started to work with project management, some project management practices, but not with formal use of these practices on our projects. And since the establishment of the Project Management Institute here, we started to use some techniques, including the earned value management, but not in a whole way, just the technique. And some areas here in Brazil that is more close to earned value management at that time. I can mention construction area, information technology area, but just the technique, not the whole bunch of guidelines that the standard 7480 standard is trying to structure for us. So when we were demanded from Brazilian Navy to this project from the acquisition, it's a $2 billion project, $2 billion project from the acquisition of 4 frigates for Brazilian Navy. They have some needs that they want to reach, and including local content, including life cycle management of the ships, including technology transfer, for example. That's something that it has been doing here in many different projects in Brazil, but it's different to measure. And they need a kind of a tool to support this monitoring control of this kind of program involving these 4 military ships. So, and the compliance, because we face here in Brazil a challenge on have the compliance of the project involving the costs, the efficiency of the use of the public investments, and we need a kind of tool that could address this situation in Brazil. So when we were demanded here at FGV is a huge company here in Brazil. Fundação Getúlio Vargas is the name in Portuguese of FGV. And we have a unit here in FGV that is FGV Projects, that is a consultancy one, in which we have a kind of consultants for the majority of our works are for public administration, and we started to consider all the Brazilian Navy demands, and we understand that EVMS based on 748 standard would be a nice choice for this contract. It was a acquisition based on a request for proposal. That's another kind of innovation for Brazilian Navy, because Brazilian Navy just had one experience with an RFP. We had another kind of contracting model here in Brazil before the use of the RFP. And we had to model this request for proposal, including the aspects involving EVMS, not only the traditional project management. It's interesting because the EVMS, when we read the standard, 748 standard, and read other documentation, and one of them was the Earned Value Management Systems Interpretation Guide by Department of Defense. It's a fantastic document for us for understand the standard. we know that all the aspects that are considered on this standard are not unusual for us. That we're talking about scope, time, risk, and cost, of course, and change management, and things that we are dealing in our routine on all our projects. But the way the standard structure and organize the things in a very smart way in our interpretation, it was the reason that we choose EVMS for this complex project for Brazilian Navy. That's the way that we proposed to Brazilian Navy the use, and they gave okay for us, and we started to model inside the RFP. We have some kind of benchmarks with USA, of course, because of this experience from the 60s that they started to work with the concept of the earned value management, and we have some benchmarkings with Australia too, because some acquisitions involving military ships in Australia that consider the use of EVMS. So it's important to us, as I told you before, aspects involving compliance, because we have a institution here in Brazil that's equivalent to GAO in the United States. That's our accountability office here in Brazil. It's called TCU, Tribunal de Contas da União. It's the same role that GAO have in the US. And they understand that it was necessary a kind of tool to support in a more efficient way the monitoring control of the project. So they are very close to us in the use of EVM as a tool for this kind of monitoring in our projects. So we could define on RFP that was published on December 2017 a kind of approach to receive from the bidders of this process a way to show the cost. We define a previous WBS with all the detailing of the service we expect to receive from the bidders. We have another kind of reference material in this RFP, for example, the MIL standard 881C, the ISO 15288, and many others reference that contribute to design this RFP and ask for EVMS for the bidders, showing in the proposals. So we entered the negotiation process with the bidders, starting to refine this information, how they will show the cost. We developed some kind of cost structure tables in which they could expose clearly the costs, the direct and indirect costs for each work package that we define on our WBS. And it was a not easy negotiation, because many of them, it was a consortium involving not only foreign companies, but Brazilian companies too, and they are not used to work with EVMS. That's they know EVMS, but they're not used to work with. And to open the information in the level that EVMS is supposed to do is something that was a little bit difficult in this process, to negotiate in this process. So but we face this, we negotiate with them, we have the short list for choose the best offer, and in the short list we could refine a little bit more all this information, how the costs were structured and detailed in this process, and then we afterwards we choose the best offer with a company that started to construct the four military ships. Then the next phase after the best offer was to negotiate the contract aspects involving EVMS with the best offer, or the winner of this bid. And it is another kind of difficult to negotiate, because we have to refine the WBS, we have to 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 weight the WBS elements with associated costs, because in a very detailed way, we have to review this cost structure table. We have to discuss the transparency indicators, and make the most important thing, to define clearly the criteria measurement of each one, because we think that the measured criteria is something very important to obtain the indicators of earned value on this process. Consider that here in Brazil, we are a newbie in this AVMS process, because not just from the Brazilian aid side and FGV side, but both in the contractor side too. So we are just learning together how to deal with this process. We have many documentation as a support, but it's a learning process that we started to do with them. But we surpassed the situation. We could negotiation a very interesting aspects in the contract, how to define the indicators, how to keep company to it during this process. And the result was the adoption of the AIA 748 standard in a whole, with all these aspects, all the 5 categories, all the 32 guidelines were considered on this contract, were defined, and since then the contract was signed on March 2019 with the winner of the bid, and Brazilian Navy is following all the aspects considered on the standard, of course, in a learning process, as I told you before, but considering that it's really something that add value to any kind of process and acquisition of this dimension. Yeah. And Brazilian Navy believes in that, so believe that they start a new acquisition process just after when we signed the frigate contract that was a polar ship. They signed a new contract for a polar ship, and they used in the same way the VMS on this contract. So trying to close this quick explanation about our experience here, what do you think that are the results of this EVMS adoption? We consider first, for Brazilian aid side, they really consider that EVM is a strategic tool, as Gordon told in the beginning of this webinar, to monitor and control projects. And we consider that the complexity involved on this program was not just an achievement for Brazilian Navy and FGV, but a kind of achievement for Brazil and public administration progress. We have a close interaction with our accountability office, as I told you before too, and we think that the gain to use of EVMS, even considering all the learning process that is involved, is something that we will have a kind of positive result in the future that compensate all the difficulty that we are facing at this moment. We really believe that EVM is a project management tool to help plan and execute complex projects. We really believe that EVM can give us a kind of transparency we really need in this process. And that's the reason that not only Brazilian Navy, but other forces here in Brazil, the Army and other ones, that they are interested in to drive EVMS on as a monitoring control tool for its complex projects. I think in a very quick 20 minutes, I think I'm on time here. Just 4 minutes to go, and I think in resume, I could explain quickly what happened in this way. We are believing that we can go forward in this, but Brazil has a green field on EVMS to be explored. I have been in touch with Gordon since then to start a kind of partnership in helping us to drive the VMS on public administration. I have talks with Alexandre Rodrigues também. It's a great partner here in these discussions here, a very experienced professional. And in this one, I think, Gordon, you will talk a little bit about it at the end, but we will be an international webinar on start on June 30, and then on 4 dates in July that we will a webinar in partnership for FGV, my company, and CPM, in which we will discuss some kind of aspects of EVMS. It will be a webinar in Portuguese and English with simultaneous translation, and we can have an interesting view for Brazilian, mainly public administration representatives that will take part in this event to discuss the importance of EVMS and here for us. I think that's it. I will have to attend the time you gave me.
That's okay. Well, no, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You know, and yeah, the CPM collaboration with Brazil, and you know, the partnership with CPM to, you know, to help facilitate the use of EVM, you know, in Brazil, we look forward to that. So, and as Mauricio said, there is a Brazilian-focused audience set of webinars that are going to happen this summer, supported by CPM, and we'll be advertising those. So, there is a question that came in, and it's one of the things that DoD struggles with for sure. But is the use of agile methods, is that flowing into, particularly with software development, is that flowing into Brazilian development activities, or?
It's interesting that talking about agile, because I think even EVMS is trying to understand how agile can be connected with the standard guidelines.
Yes, it
is. If we look for the new PMBOK and the new approach that PMBOK have with agile aspects is another thing too. I think all of us that are old professionals on project management, we are trying to understand how to use the agile methods on our traditional ways to manage projects. So, but trying to answer the question, no, we not consider the agile aspects in this experience in Brazilian Navy, but we understand that we can. There is no way in this moment here all over the world not to consider agile, and we have to understand how to use agile as a complementary tool for monitoring control project. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. DoD has been trying to do that integration for some time now, and you know, there's still struggles, but at the end of the day, the agilists have to manage their programs as well. There's one more quick question here, and then we'll hold the rest of them till the end. But the question is, do you believe that the implementation of EVM and the project's final costs and schedule performance results, that there's a direct connection between those two, that programs tend to be more successful if they're using EVM?
We really believe that, and we, as I told in my quick presentation, we have a demand for accountability office, federal accountability office, that is related to control costs in all public administration projects. So we really understand that the way that EVMS can give us risk mitigation, forecasts, and have clear indicators about the following of the project. I think we can address these things that we're talking about in the question.
Okay.
It's a perception that we have.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to move on to the next speaker, which will be Steve Wake. And the other speakers, if you take your video off, and so we just have the video of the actual speaker. That would be good. So Steve Wake, he's from the United Kingdom. Steve is at the forefront of the development of national and international standards in project controls and management, a genuine thought leader, a super connector. He gets things done. He is chairman of the Management Standards Committee of the British Standards Institute, responsible for project and program and portfolios, currently progressing project controls and benefits management, internationally acknowledged expert on EVM, currently working on an ISO EVM implementation guide. He works with the government, national and international bodies, and academia as a subject matter expert. He's worked in a variety of industries in project management, and finally, with his Guild of Educators hat, he's working with OECD and the City of London to introduce fusion skills internationally to children aged 7 to 70. He's currently helping responsible project management come into being, a more ethical, conscious approach to the benefits and impacts of programs. So, Steve, you're on for. Can we hear you? You're on mute, I think.
I knew that, Gordon. Can't multitask, I'm sorry. Can you see my little thing here on screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I presume that I can just kick off anywhere then, Gordon, can I?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Well, good evening, everybody. Greetings from London. It's 5:30, so we've had our tea, and I'm going to use, well, this is called Conversation Casino. And I'm going to pick up the various threads of what motivated me and what informed where, in order to offer you a perspective really on where we are in the UK with the use of earned value, and it'll be a variety of points that provide information about why I started out, why I continue to bang my head against the brick wall of progress to stay wedded to earned value, and it's not because I lack imagination. It's because I still am very still confirmed of the belief that earned value is a very good structure upon which to carry work out. So, without further ado, we will now have a randomized presentation. This saves Gordon having to ask me questions. And the first one is thank you and good night. So that terminates my presentation. And any questions? No. I will stay around then. I'm doing on call. Right. One of the reasons, or this is a look into the future of earned value. And I've been following earned value since the mid 1990s, having been a project person and predominantly an IT software project manager for many years on large systems, and also worked for a project management software house that sold the Artemis product. And whilst working with them, I came across earned value, and I've always been interested in developments and evolution within the landscape of what earned value can do for us. And something that's come out over the last few years and is particularly current within government thinking is the relationship or the measurement and assessment of benefits. And in 2018, our National Audit Office published a report about projects exiting what's called the major projects portfolio. So these are projects that are up very much projects that qualify to be measured using earned value criteria. They're generally hundreds of millions of pounds worth or even billions of pounds worth of projects right across the government portfolio. And the audit office was concerned that despite the fact that these projects were finished, when they were going back in and auditing them, they found that many of the initial benefits described in order to win the business case and get permission to proceed with the project, they found that the benefits were not being realized and that there wasn't a systematic system of assessment of those benefits to assure that those benefits were in fact coming out and that they had been achieved. And undoubtedly also they were disappointed that when they went back to see the originators of these benefit statements, they'd all disappeared and they weren't accountable for it. And this remains a preoccupation of Whitehall, of government, of major projects in the UK. And it struck me that we are beginning to work on this far more solidly now than even 3 or 4 years ago, that something that was brought to my attention, I think, by a CPM keynote was a presentation on something called earned benefit. And I think the guy who did that, a guy called Kik Piney, presented benefits several years ago at one of your conferences. I picked up on that, and I am still minded and am actually currently in discussion with our National Audit Office to get that 4th line on the earned value grid, so that you have your standard 3-line metric, three-line curves on your representing projects. And I am winning the argument in the discussion at the moment, both with the National Audit Office and our Infrastructure and Projects Authority, to tack that 4th line, an earned benefit line, onto the project dashboard so that we can measure and monitor benefits. Why? Because the controls community that I work with are measuring the delivery of scope day in, day out. And another line to measure, which is quantifiable and verifiable, is something that's going to be very easy for them to take on board and report back on against in terms of status and updating and recommendations for continuation and reporting into risk systems. So earned value will be enhanced, improved, and certainly improve the overall reporting and management and delivery of projects, we believe, to social benefit, but with the underlying foundation of earned value. And an amendment to software that will be relatively easy to introduce. The other issue is persistence and resilience. I started to champion earned value in 1994-95. I can never take my foot off the gas. If you don't, it disappears and goes away. I found that many organizations attempted to implement earned value with one turn of the handle. And they felt that they could, that because it failed first time around, or that the implementation was difficult, that they should not continue with it, or they weren't minded to continue with it. We're now very much of the ilk of managing expectations with organizations that they're not necessarily going to get it right, and that the one thing that we have to do before we commence an earned value implementation is to conduct a very intensive project controls maturity audit, just to figure out where it is that they are in terms of project management maturity before they endeavor to begin to use project management. So there are many organizations that are saying that they can use earned value without doing those cockpit checks, those early starts to see whether they actually have a culture, a workforce, and systems that can actually do this kind of thing. And in order to keep them from going on, and by doing that early audit, it actually enables them to keep on doing what they're trying to do, because with the audit, you get an as-is position, the position of where they are now in terms of project management, project controls maturity, and where they need to be in the future in order to become maybe compliant or mature enough to be able to bid for government business. And as we proceed through these implementations, these transformation programs, more often than not, we see light bulbs going off in people's heads as they begin to get the degree of control and transparency and access and good status information that they can feed to their upwards and outwards and vertically and horizontally through the organization. But above all, you don't give up. Also, touching on the last comments, successful implementations are really about, and I say this with 30 years experience now, are really about the mindset and the culture of the organization rather than the tool set. Just because you understand the tool set, just because you have the systems, it doesn't make you a star project manager. In the same way that if you take a foundation exam in project management and get an introductory certificate, potentially something like, I don't know, in England we have something called the APMP. That's the Association for Project Management Practitioner exam. I'm sure that the PMI has something similar, and maybe CPM does too. Just because you've got the exam and you pass the exam, it doesn't make you, and you know what the theory is. It's the practice, the psychology, the behavior, and above all the environment that you're working in, which generally brings about those successful outcomes. And in a culture which has successful earned value outcomes is one that takes the trouble to do this stuff correctly and gets out of the mindset that they are just recording and tracking information. They are gathering this information so that they can manage with it, that they can be proactive with their decision, and that it informs decision making, and that that they're forever looking ahead to see what's coming next. These are people that work very much with a sort of portfolio management approach in their head, so they can they have a more systems oriented approach to how they're working, and they're not just stuck in the silo of getting this month's set of figures out just so that they can then go and do next month's figures, wondering what the hell's going to happen next. So mindset, I would say 80% more important than tool set. A big exemplar of that is one of our larger defense organizations. It's a French defense organization, but operating around the world. It's called Thales. They did a big behavioral audit on their organization methods a couple of years ago, and they discovered that their culture was 80% technical specialisms, engineering, and 20% those problem-solving soft skills that make for successful delivery and outcomes, and people that thought and could talk and communicate and facilitate and interact with each other very well to become a really good performing team. So having got that information that they were 80% train spotting engineers, obsessive compulsives, they decided that they would switch that and work towards making their organizational culture be 80% mindset, soft skills, behaviors, team working skills, problem solving skills, and that it would be 20% and 20% technical skills. Why? Because the technical skills they felt could be introduced and trained. And what's more, those technical skills would be far more specifically tuned to specifically what Thales wanted, rather than somebody coming from the outside as a specialized engineer, but still not tuned into the actual way of working, the way we do things here within their own organization. And they are beginning to see the fruits of that success. Also with the underlying fact that they're using earned value to drive most of their major programs.
Say, Steve, Rebecca has a question. So why don't
okay.
Rebecca?
Hello, Rebecca.
There. Just hi there, dear. I'm just wondering. Yeah, it's Becky. I'm just wondering, when you measured the maturity of organizations, how do you measure their ability to demonstrate proficiency in the ability to move beyond the software from just spitting out those reports to actually using the information to communicate, problem solve, developing the actions that are necessary, preventive, corrective, and interfacing with the stakeholders? How do you measure that in their maturity? Because that's one of the issues that I've seen in organizations that I work with.
Well, there hasn't been a fully documented way of doing that, Becky. There are very sort of ad hoc assessment methods for approaching that. You know, the bigger consultancies will have their own frameworks for doing that. The work that Gordon touched upon in my introduction, that I'm doing on what's called fusion skills, and for fusion skills, read behavioral skills, read problem-solving skills, read employability skills. We are working on a grand program to bring those. I'll call them problem-solving skills as shorthand into the training and development cultures of organizations, and the target is actually to bring them into education, right, international education from the age of 7 to 70, so that people will be trained. School children will be trained in the same way that a graduate or or a postgraduate or somebody entering an apprenticeship at the age of 50 or 60 in these kinds of skills. And the target is to embed this into the day-to-day tuition and development but in partnership both with academia and enterprise. And one of the projects and programs that have come out of the work that was embarked upon by the City of London, and I'm working on in a team with the head of education for the City of London, who's responsible for school children, is that they're also using these skills to meld into the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, worldwide organization. They have a 2030 skills strategy, skills and education strategy, and they want to bring these fusion skills into the organizational frameworks or educational frameworks that they're spreading out and responsible for throughout the world. And similarly, we're working on something called the Erasmus program and doing something similar within the European Union at the moment. This work has been underway for 2 to 3 years now, and we're beginning to get close to seeing the fruits of that. And additionally, we're about to do a conference on the 21st of June, for which there will be outputs that will be shareable, working again on embedding these fusion skills into the technical specialism of estimating in particular. And we're doing this with a formal community which now resides within the UK's Cabinet Office, and the Cabinet Office is the most senior government department. There's a community within there which has been created and currently numbers 40 government departments, including all the major departments like Treasury, Work and Pensions, Education, Transport, Utilities, Power. And the idea is based upon the premise that they realise that there is no harmonised practice for estimating within government. And we are bolting on or merging in these soft skills to train estimators to not only to be really crack shot estimators, but also to have these behavioral skills, these skills. I'd almost describe them as skills of conscientiousness, you know, things that make them far better to communicate with others, both within their teams and their departments, and to be resilient enough to deal with challenge from senior ministers. Now we've got some more questions here, Steve. So okay, so I'll just final sentence for Becky. We are actually just starting. We're piloting at the moment and finishing development currently of what is effectively a matrix of competencies and the soft skills that support each of those competencies, so that we can assess and rank their importance. But almost more importantly, we've done an awful lot of work on making sure that the language we use is absolutely legally cast iron, you know, the absolute definition. So proper standards language, if you like. So when we say leadership or communications, it means the same thing to absolutely everybody in this community. And that's the underlying bedrock. You have to use the same language, the same taxonomy of skills to to make this thing work, so that you can measure properly and also recruit and identify the right kinds of people to do this work.
Excellent.
Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but yeah.
That's okay. So, so Matthew West,
Hi, Matthew.
you had a comment?
Hello, Matthew.
Yeah, just took a second to get to the mic. Sorry. I and my colleague Mel Frank have put a couple into the items in the chat, and everything you've said has very well aligned with research that was done the past 3 years by the Department of Energy and many other federal agencies at Arizona State University.
Yeah.
And just curious if you may have come into your research some of the IP2M meter output that we have recently started, the Arizona State has started to publish from our research, which aligns as both a tool for environment analysis in earned value, as well as, and this tool is now, again, it's published, it's coming out right now, going through final peer reviews. But
well, I'd be delighted to get a look. See, I kind of think I've heard of it. It may have been on a CPM type conversation a few months back, but I'd be very, very interested in seeing it. Anything that helps push this properly into government use and supply chain uses, I'll look at anything. And again, if you want to have an offline chat at some other time, I'd be happy to link up and talk. So yes, please, and I'll share the stuff we've got with you too.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Right,
So,
another spin of the wheel.
Steve,
how much time have I got?
Well, we're at the 20-minute mark here, Steve. So, EV and Agile is definitely something we can get back to.
Okay. Can I just make one big point before I shut up? Army, sure. The Army thing on there. I have found that the best thing to do is if you're going to produce a standard, and I'm using standards to leverage change and reinforce change, you must have an army of support. You cannot just develop a standard, throw it over the fence and expect everybody to be as delighted as you are to have published it and pick it up and they're going to run away and use it. You make sure that you have an army of users ready and willing to pull whatever you've put out there into use. And when you pull it into use, it's because they've told you what they want to use it for and how they want to use it. So, but if you've done that, you will save yourself an awful lot of disappointment and heartache when you publish. Make sure your readership is ready and tuned up to be the army that drives forward with this stuff.
Yep. Thank you. Excellent discussion. So we'll move on to Alexandra Rodriguez. Alexandra is executive partner of PMO Projects Group, delivering project management, consulting, and training services to clients across Europe and other parts of the world. Throughout his career, Dr. Rodriguez has delivered services for a wide range of international organizations, including Volkswagen, Motorola, Microsoft, and a whole long list of others. He has been leading the implementation of earned value management for project and program control in multi-billion-dollar U.S. investments, especially in the mining, oil and gas, and infrastructure sectors. In 2012, he was invited to become EVM ambassador in Europe by the Earned Value Management Europe Association. Alex, it's yours for 20 minutes, and others, if you can turn your video off.
Thank you, Gordon. I wonder if Steve Wake, I do like his slide, but he might eventually turn the share of the slide off as well, just in case, since I'm not talking about EV and Agile.
It's gone from my screen, Alex. I don't have it. I'm not sharing anymore.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Let me share mine and then unshare it, and that will sort it out hopefully. Okay, good. Well, thank you, Gordon. So let me try to stick to the 15 minutes. I'm putting here my time control on. And thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure. I've been a member of CPM for many years. I don't think I can count them. I'm very, very happy that I can contribute to these seminars. Now, I've organized my thoughts in three main categories, looking at the goals of this sharing of lessons learned and knowledge and information and experience with using EVM. Topic number one, how did the organizations where I've implemented EVM came about to be interested in implementing EVM? How did it happen? As I'll share with you, there were different scenarios, different situations that have pros and cons. This is important because if you want to spread EVM, we need to be aware of the circumstances that favor the triggering of that interest, and what are the aspects taken into account in those different situations. The second topic is how to overcome, or my experience in overcoming what I call the implementation barriers or myths, obstacles, which have to do with cultural, organizational, psychological aspects, as well as operational resources, information system, means to get it done. And the third topic, which I see that sometimes is often not discussed, is actually how managers, stakeholders actually use the information to make better decisions. Because ultimately, that's the goal. You're going to get better performance if you decide better, and you decide better if you have access to better information, which is EVM information. If you don't know how to use that information to decide better, then you're not going to have the better performance. You might have a wonderful dashboard, you might have wonderful information, wonderful metrics, but then if you don't convert that understanding of the project into deciding better, then you won't get performance improvements. So that's another topic that I want to share with you what my experience has been. So I'll start with the discussion on the how did my clients and organizations I worked with became interested on EVM. Now, this experience changed over time. I've done it in different countries, ranging from South America to Africa, Europe, Asia. Big projects, small projects, small IT projects, large capital investment projects, which came to be over time my main area of experience, and also different industries. And the situations varied a little bit, but generically I found two main scenarios. One is the situation where the organizations really know about EVM, they learned about it. The PNP certification within PMI has contributed, in my opinion, a lot for people to understand that EVM exists. For as simple as those exam questions are in the PNP exam, in the PMI certification exam, it tells you that EVM exists. You have to understand those three metrics so people are aware of it, know it exists. And in those cases where the company knows about EVM, sometimes they have a mandate, or someone in a position of power, like a project director, wants to implement it. That's one scenario. The other scenario is where organizations never heard of it, or if they did, they were not aware that EVM was that important. They sometimes heard of it as an optional thing that can be done, but not as something that is at the core of managing a project. Now, when I looked into situations where companies knew about EVM, they had a mandate. The advantage, of course, was the sponsorship. So they came to us because they wanted to do it. But there are also some risks and cons to take into account. One of them we found was the questioning as to whether EVM is applicable to their reality. There's the perception that it's a U.S. defense government contract thing, and our reality is private sector. I forgot to mention that I've done it both in public and in private, but in public projects, investment projects, the experiences I had were not bound to any kind of government regulation or norms like as it happens in the US. So it became similar to the private sector experience. So is this applicable to us? That's something to take into account. Another barrier I found when companies knew about EVM was the fact that this requires a high degree of project management maturity. We might not be there. We want you to tell us whether we can implement it, or what is it that we can do, and might take us 1 year or two to get those things done until we reach the point where we can implement EVM, right? So they see it as something that you can only build on top of a high degree of project management maturity. And that's not good because then they think, well, we need to do proper scheduling, we need to improve estimating, we need to improve our IT system, and only after we have all those things, those requirements satisfied, then we can implement EVM. And that delays the process, and sometimes it just fades away. And also sometimes there were cases of previous failed attempts. We tried it before, it didn't work. Why was it? So you have those barriers. Now, for situations where people never heard about it, they generally had very poor control systems, basically scheduling, variance analysis, financial controls, but not performance management controls, project or program performance management controls. And in those cases, it's quite easy. My experience has been that it's quite easy to convince them. I can share with you just quickly one of the dashboards that we've used many times. So, well, this is how we do it. So we tell them, listen, this is the way of doing it, right? There's no really other option. If you really want to be on top of your project, if you want to know where you are, what the trends are, what is your planned progress, your actual progress, how much it costs, and what is your cost efficiency and time efficiency, that this is what you need. It's how it's done. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes that's, we came across clients where they have, invented their own metrics in an attempt to try to find out what was going on in their projects. So that's easy, that's the advantage. I mean, I've never came across people saying, oh, no, those metrics, they don't talk to us. They find the metrics and the information intuitive. Of course, the aspect to take into account is that sometimes they're not aware of many other things they're going to have to do properly in order to get it up and running. Okay, and not just about project management practices, information system, but also culture and culture of the project managers and also of the organization. So then we move into the second topic. I'm moving to the second topic: how to overcome the barriers in both cases. I've separated the two: the people barriers, organizational, culture, psychological. The fear of being exposed, the fear of a bureaucratic monster coming in with lots of data. So how to overcome that? Well, I find it quite useful to explain them that this is just a way of actually seeing better. I mean, the problems are the same. Your project is going to have the same challenges. That doesn't change. It's like flying a plane. You can have a plane with a very modern dashboard that tells you everything around you, bad weather, good weather, other planes nearby, or you can fly a plane in an archaic, with an archaic dashboard. There's someone making noise. If you can turn off your microphone, I'd appreciate it. So what do you want to be? I mean, you want to fly with a modern cockpit or with an archaic cockpit? So there's nothing to be afraid of, because this is just about having to face the same challenges, but being much, much better informed and showing you are on top of things. There's no issues about variation. Variation is not incompetence, or is incompetence is not to see it early, measure it, understand it, and act upon it, and fix it. That's what incompetence is. So there's a lot of demystifying those fears about being exposed, especially with numbers that they sometimes don't understand fully. So you have to do proper training. That's very important, and make it accessible, intuitive. Not you can leave the all the jargon of the advanced standards for a later moment if they're just getting into learning the method. I also find it quite important, the idea that you're not going to wait to reach a certain level of project management maturity in order to implement EVM. You're going actually to increase your project management maturity by using EVM. EVM is going to drag you up the ladder. You're going to do it via EVM, okay? Not after. You're not going to do EVM after you are mature. You're going to get mature with EVM, right? So EVM will be asking you for better schedules, for realistic estimates, for objective ways of measuring progress. And as you try to fill these requirements, you start implementing those practices and getting more mature. And also the idea that you can implement EVM at different levels of complexity. You don't have to go through the final Rolls-Royce version of your EVM system. You can start with a simpler system, and then you start improving it over time as you take benefits from it, and as you understand what is implied in reaching those improvements. So, for example, you realize that your cost allocation to work packages is being a little bit sometimes too not very accurate. You're finding some variances which don't really match reality because the criteria using to allocate cost is not the best one, so you start improving on that, and so on. So this idea that, you can implement EVM at different levels. You can have a simpler system, you can have a heavyweight, a light system, a heavier system, more complex system, a simpler system, and you can make the path. You don't have to do everything at once. In terms of implementing operational barriers, IT system, and so on, at a certain moment in time, you have to tell them they should integrate information, they should have automate data collection. I find that sometimes when companies don't have that working properly, starting sometimes with simple Excel sheets to collect data, it's quite attractive, it's easy, familiar, but then as they realize that, doing that over and over and over becomes laborious, and then automation comes out. But automation after the procedure has become stable and people understand the value of it and they recognize it needs to be done, then let's do that automatically, more robust, centralized, more resistant to, less prone to errors, a lot of advantages. I mean, they have to invest. They have to make some investment on the use of software to do that. Also, the integration with the other components of the management information system is something to be very careful about, especially integrating it with an ERP system like SAP, for example. Mistaking, for example, actual cost with the financial reporting from an SAP system can be disastrous, because one thing is, when invoices get accepted, approved, and paid. The other thing is actually when the costs are incurred or when the resources are consumed. So those are different things. You have to explain them, that financials are one thing, budget value is another thing, and actual cost is also another thing, which does not necessarily match financials. So the integration with the other components of the information system is important. It will need to be done, but sometimes it's not the best thing to start with, and you may convert your initiative in a large IT project, which is not the goal. This is, shall we say, a process improvement project. Is a project implementing EVM. It's a project that improves the processes for managing the portfolio, the programs, and the projects. And you don't want to get that bogged down in too early on the IT side of it, which is a means to the end and not the end in itself. Right, making better decisions, right? Of course, you promise them, if you use EVM, your project will be more successful, but why is that so? Well, because you are better informed. Therefore, how do we then link this information into decisions? And what I found useful was, in the first place, training is important. Training on decision-making, examples, scenarios. So if you get this data from EVM, then you're going to have to interpret the project reality based on this data. What do you think can be the best decisions that you can make? Create some scenarios for decision-making. Also, make sure that if you're actually helping them to do project reporting and program reporting, that all qualitative information and interpretation you make about the project, you link that with EVM information. So if you're saying, this area of the project is late, brackets, SPI equals 0.8, or according to the schedule performance index. So always mix the numbers there, the EVM information, into the interpretation of what the project is. Because people they're not used to do that. They're simply not used to do that. I just, a minute more and I'll finish. So they see the numbers, they say, okay, fine, nice dashboard, nice metrics. Wow, looks quite sexy, in fact, quite interesting. But then they are used, when they're going to write a report, when they're going to present a project, they're not used to speak that language. So you have to help them and create a culture of people actually seeing and understanding, reading, perceiving the status of the projects based on the EVM information. It's not a requirement that you have to meet and package to send to top level management. It's actually you understanding the project using that information. And then the decisions, when you make the decisions, what EVM information was the basis for the decision, and what performance improvements you expect, and then track, right? So if you are expecting to recover a cost variance in 2 months' time based on a certain decision, then you record that, and you're going to check if that actually saving was actually achieved, and whether your decision was actually effective or not, and continuing doing that throughout. So you blend the EVM information into your interpretation, into your decisions, into the effectiveness of your decisions. It's like using a GPS to drive. You really have to drive looking at the GPS. It's part of you, as an example. And of course, other stakeholders as well, not just the project manager, project team, the sponsor, or top management. When you start using systematically, I find it be very important to carry out also some indoctrination on EVM, always demystifying it and saying, this can really give you a lot of information. You can know a lot of things, especially what-if analysis. You can look at projections, but at the very foundation, it's very basic. It's how can you actually not claim to be controlling a project if you don't know how much you should have done planned value, how much you've done earned value, and how much did it cost what you have done actual cost. These three questions are not optional to control a project. So this has been my experience. It works. Some cases are more successful than others. The drum in consulting is always when we leave. Sometimes clients don't sustain things. The project is over, or the guys that were passionate about it left, and the sustaining thing is always a challenge. But we found it useful for our business also, but for their projects and for the companies. And some of them kept doing it over time by themselves.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Alex. The point that you were driving home and was in Steve's presentation as well, and Becky's question was the fact and the need to actually do something with the data. The data, EV will provide you with data, but the actual use of it and the ability to make decisions with it is the most important. And to be honest, I don't think we as EV analysts talk enough about that. But no, so that's an excellent point. Chelsea, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm reading it here. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I had a question just regard with your two different scenarios where you were saying some people, I wrote it down, but if you recall your two scenarios that you mentioned in the beginning, so, because with EVM, some people tell me don't call it EVM, call it performance management, because people are intimidated by it or they don't think it's a value added. I think with some project managers, and they feel like, well, it just gives you information in the past. I'm already beyond that point. I really don't see the value in it. And I tried to explain them the benefits of it. And so I was just wondering, from your perspective, when you're talking to the two different groups, do you feel more inclined to say earned value or performance management, or how do you work around when people do not necessarily that EVM resonates with them in a positive light?
Right. That's a very good question. In fact, yes. One challenge with EVM, it's full of acronyms, right? And as you know, the old acronyms, BCWS, BCWP, are quite scary, and sometimes the language, making the method itself accessible regarding terminology and the name of the method itself. So if they don't know anything about EVM, they never heard it, I always refer to the acronym as a convenience. Well, this is the way of doing it, and the focus is on decision making. The motto I use is always making better decisions with better information to achieve better performance. Yeah, so the focus is always on performance, on deciding better, on making better decisions, better foundations for your decisions. More transparency. You can justify why you've decided. You can show you are on top of things. So the goal, the focus is always on understanding performance, as you say. And EVM it's it's the acronym for convenience to refer to the method, so that it doesn't become something like an aside thing. I haven't found many antibodies about EVM. I guess you might find that. I did have cases where clients tried to implement it, but they came to us because they felt they did something wrong. So there were not so many antibodies there. There were questions about, is this really applicable to us? I guess that in environments where you've been having lots of auditing, EVM-based auditing, people feel a bit like, this thing is to audit us and to bother us with things. And, this is where sometimes the means to the end becomes the end itself, and they don't like to hear about EVM. But yes, I would agree with you that not too much emphasis on the acronym, just for convenience of communication and language. The real goal is a performance management system, having it in place. And this is the way of doing it. I generally tell them, listen, in economics, we don't reinvent, we don't ask ourselves, how are we going to measure the rising prices? Well, it's inflation. How are we going to measure then economic growth? How are we going to measure economic performance? How are we going to measure employment? Well, economics is full of metrics to measure the status of the economy. Same thing in engineering, in medicine, and this is the way and the only one to do it properly in projects, if you really want to do it professionally. And then EVM is just the birth name of the method. That's how I go about it. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and okay, well, thank you very much. I think our 20 minutes is up, and there may be a question or two that we'll have at the end as well. So thank you, Alexandra. It was awesome. So we'll move on to Kim Henderson from Australia. Kim Henderson is an accomplished information technology project manager and project controls manager, experienced in the application of EVM on major defense projects and also commercial sector projects utilizing tailored EVM-like techniques. He is currently employed as an integrated project controls consultant, Defense by TBH Limited, a specialist Australian project controls consulting organization. He has had a passionate he has been a passionate global advocate for EVM and Earn Schedule, which includes serving on the CPM board from 2008 to 2019 as Vice President, Research Standards, Vice President, Global Outreach, and Executive Vice President. Kim has also participated as a member of the core team for PMI EVM Practice Standards 2nd edition, project released in 2012, a core writing team member for the International Standards Organization Technical Committee 258, Working Group 7, which developed a global ISO EVM standard published in 2018, project leader for the update to the Australian EVM standard, which is modified adoption of the ISO EVM standard, and is currently the convener and project leader of ISO TC 258 Working Group 12, which is developing the ISO EVM implementation guide as a companion document to the ISO EVM standard. Kim is a mentor and teacher of EVM and Earn Schedule use across the globe. Kim? And then if we can turn off our videos here, Alex. Kim?
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Gordon. And it doesn't seem it's been that long since we were on another call together for the implementation guide.
Yeah.
I guess I've adopted a bit of a different approach than some of the other presenters. I've sort of taken a more global view of the application of EVM in Australia. And what I thought I'd do is just to give a very, very brief overview of the history of Australia. And that'll actually help provide some context for the application of EVM in Australia and some of the sort of weird and wonderful things that we do with EVM in this country. So essentially, Australia started as a British, or the European settlement of Australia started as a British penal colony in Sydney Cove in January 1788. The reason the British settled us was because of the loss of the American War of Independence. The British needed to find a new place to send all of their convicts. And really the selection criteria for Botany Bay, as it was then known, was to sort of, it was as far away from the United Kingdom as it was possible to be and still be on the planet Earth. And of the hundreds of thousands of convicts that were transported to Australia, very, very few ever went back to the UK. So in 1901, we became independent. We have a US-style federation of what were 6 Australian colonies became states. But instead of using the US presidential system of democracy, we actually use the British parliamentary system with a prime minister. We have a federal capital that's located in Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory, which is modelled on the District of Columbia in the US. And we have a very, very long history of a close relationship with the United States, and it's certainly militarily and more generally. And the military relationship goes back as far as the First World War, and it's continued right through. Since then, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the War on Terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I guess most recently, Australia is actively supporting Ukraine. We're both English-speaking countries, although Steve Wake would probably say that neither of us speak proper English, and we're generally seen as having a similar shared colonial history. There are a couple of differences. We've had no revolution in Australia because the British gave us our independence, and we haven't had a civil war in this country. So it's generally considered that we have a similar social and political outlook to the United States. That said, there are significant differences, and probably the most significant is the Australian attitude to universal health care and the very strict gun control regime that we have in this country. And we know that that comes up in discussion in the US political debates, with some people in the US saying, be more like Australia, and other people saying, we don't want to be anything like Australia. So right now, we're a country of 25 million people, which is probably roughly 75% of California, but we actually have the same, geographically, we have the same landmass as the continental USA. We're a wealthy first world country. There's only 25 million of us, as I've said, but we actually have the 13th largest economy globally. So moving into sort of some points that would be of direct interest to the EBM discussion. Right now, Australia has, by our standards, we certainly, with 25 million people, don't have the scale in the United States, but certainly by our standards, we have a massive expenditure on defence programs. The last count, the defence portfolio or the defence acquisition portfolio here is around about $880 billion. And just as a bit of a marker, sort of $1 Australian is roughly 70 US cents. So for 25 million people, that's a huge amount of money. On top of that, and a lot of this is driven by the need for infrastructure renewal. A lot of it's also been driven by the economic response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a massive state government infrastructure project investments that are going on all around the country. I mean, it's sort of, Australia at this moment, certainly in the major capital cities and also many of the regional areas, is just one great big, construction zone. And on top of that, there's industry, industry sectors like mining, construction, and infrastructure. There's significant projects going on in all of those spaces and many others. That's also drawing on sort of project controls, project management, project performance, management type people. So there's a huge amount of work on in this country. There are big shortages of skilled resources, particularly in the project controls and the project management spaces. And because of all of this expenditure, there's a significant level of interest both at the political level by the federal and state governments, as well as the Australian people in terms of the performance of these major Australian projects. And as you could probably anticipate, some of them at least are not going well, and they're sort of ending up in the newspapers for all of the wrong reasons. In the defence sector, there's an oversight regime similar to what takes place in the US, that's done by the Australian National Audit Office, which has a similar role to the US Government Accountability Office. So the next discussion point is, how did earned value management come to Australia? And the history is that it came to Australia from the US Defence Department, through the Australian Defence Department, through sort of the very close contacts and relationships between the two departments. And it actually happened, and again, I'm not 100% certain of the timeline, but certainly in the late 1980s to early 1990s, EVM was adopted by the Australian Department of Defence. That timeframe actually aligns to the start of EVM and project performance management based conferences in Canberra. These conferences have continued in multiple forms over the years. For a brief period, it was actually run by CPM. And today those conferences continue, and they're run by the Project Governance and Control Symposium, which I also head up. We have a very cooperative relationship with with CPM. Also people like Steve Wake in the UK. And, we're more than happy to draw on the international experience that's out there in both EVM and project performance management, with speakers, selected speakers, getting themselves a PGCS funded trip to Australia, which sort of, generally falls into the, popular category of an invitation. And we're currently working with Gordon right now on the logistics of him coming to Australia this August to present at the PGCS and conduct a masterclass for us. So why did Australian Defence DoD get interested in EVM? Back in the 80s and early 90s, well, the story never changes. At that time, they were looking for techniques to help manage and contain costs, predominantly costs, but also schedule overruns from the major defence projects of that era. And, some things don't ever seem to change, because that's exactly the situation that we're in 2022. So some things never change, and, it's sort of just seems to be a universal truth in the major project space that there will be cost and schedule challenges that lead to many projects exceeding budget and schedule. The next point, so just in terms of the EVM developments in Australia, a lot of what we do certainly originated from the US. Certainly the US criteria-based EVM, sort of the ANSI EIA 748 standard, it is well known in this country. Australia does not have any problem utilising the standards of other countries. So back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, Australia had absolutely no problem invoking US and US DoD military standards in our acquisition contracts. In some countries, that would never happen because of the sensitivities. In this country, we're quite happy to do that. One of the developments, or one of the key developments, EVM developments in Australia, is that we developed the 11-step process model of EVM. This was actually occurred in the late 1990s, early 2000s. The reason that it was developed might be of some interest to the US audience, and it was basically to deal with what was seen as the perceived overheads imposed by the criteria-based EVM approach that's in the 748 standard. The 11-step process model was actually formalised in the Australian EVM standard, national EVM standard, that was first published in 2003. The nomenclature's AS4817. It was amended and updated in 2006. And I guess the point here is that it is based on 748, but the 11-step process model actually provides a bit of a different perspective that might be of value for people that are looking to implement EVM around the world. In terms of the Australian Defence Department's application of EVM, we do have an EVM mandate. I would characterise it as a relatively weak mandate compared to the OMB mandate in the US. It is limited to defence. It's not whole of Australian government. The reason that I say that it's a weak mandate is because it's relatively easy to get a waiver from the EVM requirement at a relatively low level in the management hierarchy. We still have a $20 million contract threshold for the application of EVM, and I think that number's a legacy from the US that we haven't updated. The current defence policy is to take a risk-based approach to EVM. So there's actually a policy document that includes a risk-based questionnaire, and depending on the answers to the questions, it sort of guides project directors as to whether they should implement EVM or not. So that approach, I would say, makes sense on the surface. You know, you sort of nod your head and say, yeah, we should have a risk-based approach to EVM. However, I guess my observation is that it's not that common currently for EVM to be applied on a lot of defence acquisition projects. And given the risk profile of most defence acquisition contracts, I would sort of think that there should be more EVM applied than is currently the case. So, and I guess the suspicion is that the risk, you know, the risk system or the risk-based approach to EVM is sort of manipulated so that the right answer comes up that we don't actually need to do it. And I guess as an observation, and I've sort of worked back into Australian DoD in the last few years at a policy level, you know, above the project and program level, is that EVM is currently not that popular within the Defence Department here. The reasons for that, objectively, I don't have an answer. You know, there's no research that sort of is investigated it. My sort of reasoning and speculations are, one, in the mid 2000s, the use of EVM within the Defence Department was heavily compliance based. So it was within the department used a lot, very heavily as a compliance tool. Most people don't like having anything sort of shoved down their throat, particularly Australians, and I suspect that that's caused a fairly long-standing negative reaction to the method. And I think the other aspect of EVM, which some of the other speakers have touched on, is that EVM's a wonderful system and it's a wonderful methodology, and the S-curve charts really lay a project, really lays a project's performance on the table. And if you're a project that's running behind schedule and over budget, EVM really exposes it, and it sort of leads to what I call the A word, accountability. And as I'm sure we're all aware, in our own environments, there's a lot of people that aren't that interested in being accountable. Another aspect in Australia is that we have a very strong focus on schedule. There was a chief executive officer of what used to be called the Defence Materiel Organisation, which I guess is our version of acquisition technology and logistics in the US. And this gentleman's name was Steve Gumley. And Steve's mantra was schedule is king. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The research findings of the era were that most contracts delivered to budget, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Schedule overrun was the most common issue. It's still the most common issue in Australian Defence acquisition contracts. Every year, the Australian National Audit Office publishes what's called a major projects report. They've been doing that for about the last 13 or 14 years. And the recurring theme is most Australian defence contracts deliver to budget, but on average, most major defence contracts in this country experience schedule overruns in the order of 30%. So some years it's 28% on average, other years it's sort of 32%, but the rough number over a lot of years is that we have around about a 30% schedule overrun on most major defence acquisition contracts. And I guess the history and the perception is that EVM has been seen as a cost-based tool. And you can have the discussion, but there's certainly the perception out there that because of the cost focus historically of EVM, it's of limited value in managing schedule overruns. And again, we can have a big discussion on that, but that's the perception. So one of the things that I've been doing and one of the things that I've been advocating is the use of earned schedule as a technique based on EVM or part of EVM, depending on what your perspective is, to help address, one, the perception that EVM's a cost-based tool, and two, to try and sort of provide more insights into the perennial problem of 30% schedule overruns on major defence contracts. And I guess the third point is a reason that people don't like EVM is it has this remarkable capacity to expose a project's true status, and a lot of people, a lot of managers especially, dislike the scrutiny that comes from the formal application of an EVM system. Another key thing that probably didn't help the use of EVM in the Australian Defence Department is that around about 2005, 2006, the Defence Material Organisation decided to disband the Earned Value Management Directorate that they had in place at the time. The reason, as best I understand it from the history, is that they thought that they were mature enough not to need an EVM directorate. The function of the directorate was policy advice, implementation, guidance, and basically to be a centre of excellence for EVM within defence. Whether, you know, and the idea that DMO or the Defence Material Organisation was mature enough at the time not to need EVM or an EVM directorate has clearly been demonstrated since that time to certainly not be the case.
Say, Kim, there,
Yeah.
Rebecca has a question.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Kim.
How you doing, Becky?
Oh, just peachy. One of the things that we have seen in some parts of the U.S. government use of EVM is that an avoidance of the $20 million threshold. So they argue, well, software needs to be set off because I'll use a different way of managing it. So I'm going to segment it off. It's going to be managed differently. Or I'm going to manage my construction piece separate from actually installing the various pieces of technology or the parts of the construction that pertain to that technology. Is any of that happening in Australia? And if it is, do you just go along with it, or do you try to keep the program itself together? How are you handling that?
So for the projects and programs that are implementing EVM, and they're generally the major acquisition contracts, I mean, certainly the top end projects, the future frigate projects, do have the EVM mandate. There is an avoidance technique where, or that I've seen in some situations where they'll say that, yes, the overall program needs to apply EVM, but if a contractor falls under the $20 million threshold, they don't.
Right.
They don't have to apply EVM, so you end up with kind of a hybrid program where parts of it apply EVM and other parts of it don't. On my reading of the policy, that's clearly not what's envisaged. There's certainly cases for not imposing the full EVM requirement on a $20 million supplier. But really the best practice, and what I certainly advocate, is that you need to get the data from those suppliers so that you can actually calculate the EVM metrics and incorporate their performance into the earned value management system. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, there are avoidance techniques in this country. The Chief Information Officer Group, which is another part of the Australian Defence Department responsible for managing IT projects and come under separate policy guidance, they don't use EVM at all. And I would argue that if there's any place in the Australian Defence Department that needs earned value management, it's them. So does that answer your question?
It does. It's just an issue that we've constantly been faced with, and oftentimes the subtext is I'll be within my thresholds if I avoid having these certain pieces fall under the mandate, and it's a problem because the ones they don't want, as you noted, software, for instance, truly does need to be under the mandate. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Kim. We're at about the 20-minute mark, and so I'm wondering if we could transition to, if the other panelists could open up their windows and then we can maybe do some global questions. I've got one to kick it off anyway. Hey, Alexandra, and Steve Wake too. So, um, so when I talk to people about earned value management, sometimes I get the impression that they think that it's of no use because it doesn't fix their problems on the program, right? They still have technical problems. They still have cost problems. They still have schedule problems. But yet, I don't think the intent of EVM is a magic pill that says you use it and you will absolutely have no problems on your program. It just exposes the problems earlier so that they have less impact. I mean, that's my view. What's your guys' thought about, hey, EVM is magic and you should have no problems if you're using it?
Can I make a
Anyone
comment,
start?
Gordon?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just I'll take it actually from the last comment of my 15 minutes discussion. Yeah, my message generally is, EVM, it's the right equipment for you to do what you have to do. It's the best equipment you can have. You cannot be better equipped other than having EVM, but you have to make the decisions yourself. The only thing that will resolve your problems is your decisions, and the problems are unavoidable. They're always going to be there all the time. It's the nature of the project. You're going to have variation, you're going to have overruns, delays, lack of resources, technical issues. Welcome to Earth. That's never going to change. That's why we need managers. And, EVM is the right tool for you to have the best equipment at hand, to face those challenges.
Yeah,
but you are the
excellent.
one who's going to perform better. Therefore, your project will
Okay.
perform better.
Okay. Steve, any comment there?
Well, it brings to mind from my world famous little booklet that I wrote years ago, a comment I made in there was that using value doesn't make bad people good, but it will make good people brilliant. Because it's the supply of information. It's being able to gather that information and then use it. And no amount of software or system will make somebody who's not particularly gifted a genius manager all of a sudden, and even those that use it can use it correctly. But if they think it's just about delivering next month's reports, as I said earlier on, they're wasting their time. The point is that they should be looking 5, 6, 7 months ahead, 2 years ahead, 5 years ahead. What's happening there? How can we influence that? Right. And also another thing, and I think it may have even been Alex that said it, I can't remember, but variance is your friend. You can't manage without variance.
Right.
It's what you do with that variance and how you correct that and how you learn from that, which is where the growth and the evolutionary possibilities with earned value occur.
Okay, no, excellent. That leads into a question that Chelsea Calhoun is asking. Chelsea?
Sorry, it's hard to find my mute button sometimes. Hi, my question was, I find on my projects I've supported, we focus on CPI and SPI, and we say, oh, it's good above 1, it's bad below 1, and sometimes project managers, as some have indicated, they don't like that accountability. They don't like that transparency. So things happen or things are done so that you always have that 1. You're on schedule, you're on budget, everything looks good, versus of us preaching, it's not so much good and bad, but there is a change to your plan, and acknowledging that change and determining, okay, well, where is the change? We planned for this, but X happened. We planned for Y, but Z happened. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about your experiences in that regard, and if you feel like we should be kind of changing that narrative of good, bad versus, look, there's a change to the plan.
Kim, do you got any thoughts?
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a comment that one of the participants in a earned value management training class I taught in Denver a long time ago, we were discussing the very same topic. And this lady's response was, the management in my country don't understand CPI or SPI, but they know that it needs to equal 1. which obviously leads to suboptimum behaviours. You know, I should listen to Walt Lipke sooner than I often do. The paper by Quentin Fleming, which is quite an old paper, where he made the point that CPI and TCPI are the most valuable metrics. And if you're an earned schedule person, you can do the same with SPI time and the TSPI metric, because putting those two metrics together, number one, it tells you where you are. And number two, it tells you the future efficiency that you need to achieve a target. And it does it in a different way to the IEACs, because we're not talking about dollars or time, and we're not talking about overruns. We're talking about numbers. So it desensitizes the discussion. And if you frame the discussion, and I've got a project at this very moment where I'm trying to convince the director that I'm working that he needs to allocate more resources. You know, our SPI time is 0.9. We've had a deteriorating trend for the life of the project. Our future performance is now 1.2. We need to do something to change the direction of that trend, and using the TCPI and CPI completely reframes the discussion. I used to use the IEACs, the IEAC times, and I've actually adopted my practice to actually focus more on the TCPI and the CPI.
Okay, all right. Yeah, what I've seen is when people focus on the metrics, they lose sight of managing the program. And as Steve and Alexander said earlier, it's you learn from the variances. In fact,
Can I make a comment,
ahead.
Gordon?
Yeah,
just following from you. The question was from Chelsea, I believe. Yeah. I actually would like to just building on what the others have just have said. Two things. One is the concept also of control limits or normal variation. So people don't like to see CPI less than 1 because I'm overspending, or SPI below 1, I'm behind schedule. Well, there's absolutely no system, for as healthy as it is, that will exhibit constant performance. Our body temperature, for example, is not constant throughout the day. We tend to have higher temperature at night when the day is finishing, a lower temperature in the morning, normal. The problem is the threshold. Okay, so work with thresholds. Now it's not easy to establish credible thresholds because it needs some history, some information, but you can always start with something, right? Say plus minus 5%, plus minus 10%. Generally, the further you are into the project, those thresholds need to be shorter. If you're looking at cumulative past performance, for example. So there's nothing wrong with being below 1. It's have you passed the threshold, and if you are seeing it moving more and more and more below 1, you're still in the control limit, so you're still on the red light. It's giving you a warning sign that you should do something about it so that you don't go beyond the threshold. That's the second aspect, without taking too much time. It's also the idea that, you know, a performance system that shows you always a constant outcome, it's a broken system. It's not working.
Definitely.
If I'm driving my car and it's telling me that my consumption is always 10 liters per 100 kilometers all the time throughout my trip, something is wrong with my indicator in the dashboard of my car. So just fixing the numbers to get a constant outcome. Variation means you have a healthy system. The other thing you mentioned, Gordon, very important, is when the variation goes beyond the threshold. It reminds me also, I remember many years ago, I read a book about software development from a Canadian author. I can't recall his name. He said, every bug you find when you're programming is a treasure because you learn from fixing it. Right? And you apply to future things. So the learning as well, if you move beyond the line, then there's an opportunity for you to fix the problem and then to learn into the future. So it's all about positives as well, and work with thresholds, work with normal variation. there's nothing wrong being above or below the target within a control limit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Mauricio, did you have any comments that you wanted to share there? Or?
No, we are at the ending of the event, and I think just to thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to share my experience here in Brazil. That we are starting this process here, and it's a great opportunity to share it with so experienced professionals here. Just to thank you for everything.
Yeah, well, thank you. Steve, did you have any additions to Chelsea's question?
Yeah. For those of you that have heard of or haven't heard of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you'll know, and for those that haven't read it, spoiler alert, the secret to the universe is the number 42. Now, that is a work of fiction. And the lesson from it is that don't think that you can summarize the rich environment that your project is taking place within, which is the world, can be summarized with one number. It's indicative. It's not absolute. And it's one of many sources and bits and pieces that, again, the professional, the good project manager or the good project team manager takes account of when they are managing their project. So don't get hung up on or thinking you can get away with one number.
So I think in general, Kelsey, everybody agrees that looking at EVM in the way that you've seen it is definitely a disservice and is not the way to do it. And every chance we get, we should be messaging otherwise and using them for decision making. We have just a few minutes left here. So is there any other questions? If not, any last comments by the panelists? Steve, you look like you were.
No, I was just going to say, if your CPI is 42, then head for the hills.
Yeah, that's not good. Any other closing comments from the panelists then?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done anything for CPM, Gordon. So, appreciate the invite. Appreciate the opportunity to share the Australian experience. And as you well know, from what will soon be personal experience, we're always in this country looking around the world for ideas, techniques, what ways that we can do things better without necessarily having to learn the hard lesson ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Alex, any last words?
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation. It was, I think it was a very useful discussion and very varied range of ideas presented and very interesting questions. Yeah, I think we'll have a mission on our shoulders, which is to disseminate perhaps if not the most important tool or equipment and process and culture that should be used to control projects and programs. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, well, thank you all for participating. I mean, I know that it's like 2 or 3 a.m. or 1 a.m. or something for Kim, and he was kind enough to participate different times across the globe here. Excellent set of perspectives. Really appreciate you guys participating, and look forward to continued collaboration in the international front. So. Thank you much. I think we'll close out for now. So.
Okay. Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you.